The stars burned cold and silent in the outer reach where no empire held power and no law protected the weak. Princess Yuna of the Valoran Empire lay trapped beneath twisted metal and shattered glass. Blood ran down her face and pooled beneath her broken body. Around her, the bodies of her royal guard lay still and cold. They had died protecting her. They had failed. The attack came without warning. One moment, the royal warship Eternal Crown sailed through peaceful space on a diplomatic mission. The next moment, Keth raiders dropped out of hyperspace with weapons blazing. The Keth Dominion had been waiting for this chance. A Valoran princess was worth more than a planet in ransom. Yuna tried to move, but pain shot through her leg like fire. She could hear the distant sounds of boots on metal. The raiders were searching the wreckage for survivors. She knew what they would do when they found her. The Keth were not known for mercy. She was the daughter of Queen Hana and heir to an empire that spanned 1,000 worlds. She had been raised to show no fear and bow to no one. But lying there in the dark with death coming closer, she felt very small and very alone. The Eternal Crown groaned around her. Fires burned somewhere in the lower decks. The life support was failing, and the air grew thin. Even if the raiders did not find her, she would die here in the cold void. She thought of her mother sitting proud on the crystal throne. She thought of the empire that would mourn her and then forget her. She thought of all the things she would never do and all the words she would never say. Then she heard something strange. Not the heavy boots of Keth soldiers, but the whine of a cutting torch and the clang of metal being moved aside. Someone was coming through the wreckage from a different direction. A light appeared in the darkness. A figure climbed through the twisted hull carrying a plasma torch in one hand and a scanner in the other. The figure wore a battered flight suit patched in a dozen places. When the light fell on his face, Yuna saw something that made her blood run cold. A human. Her empire had conquered 3 human colony worlds in the last century. Humans in Valoran space were workers and servants. They were considered lesser beings useful for labor, but unworthy of respect. Yuna had grown up believing this as surely as she believed the stars were hot and space was cold. Now, a human stood over her with her life in his hands. The human knelt beside her and checked her wounds. With quick, careful hands. His face showed concern but no recognition. He did not know who she was. To him, she was just another survivor. "You are hurt bad," he said in accented Valoran. His voice was rough but not unkind. "I am going to get you out of here." Yuna stared at him. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You know what my people have done to yours." The human paused for just a moment. Then he went back to work, cutting away the metal that pinned her leg. "Because you need help," he said simply. "That is reason enough." His name was Jake Mitchell. He told her this as he carried her through the burning wreckage of her ship. He was a cargo pilot flying a beat-up freighter called the Second Chance. He had been hauling supplies to a mining colony when he picked up her distress signal. The Keth raiders were still searching the front sections of the ship. Jake moved through the shadows with Yuna in his arms. He was not a large man, but he carried her like she weighed nothing. His steps were sure and silent like a man who had done this before. "How do you know this ship?" she whispered. "The layout." The blind spots. Jake did not answer right away. When he spoke, his voice was flat. "I spent 2 years on a Valoran prison transport." "You learned things." Yuna felt shame rise in her chest. Her people had put this man in chains. Now he was risking his life to save her. She did not understand. They reached his ship through an emergency docking port. The Second Chance was small and old and ugly. The hull was scarred with old damage and new patches. But the engines hummed with quiet power, and the cockpit was clean and well maintained. Jake set her down gently on a medical cot and began treating her wounds. He worked quickly and skillfully. His supplies were limited, but he used them without hesitation. "I can pay you," Yuna said. Whatever you want. Name your price. Jake did not look up from his work. I do not want your money. Then what do you want? Everyone wants something. He finally met her eyes. His gaze was steady and unreadable. Right now, I want to stop your bleeding. After that, I want to get us away from those raiders. Beyond that, I have not thought about it. The ship shuddered as Jake ran to the cockpit. Through the small window, Una could see Keth fighters turning toward them. They had been spotted. Jake dropped into the pilot's seat and his hands flew across the controls. The second chance lurched forward with surprising speed. Warning lights flashed and alarms blared, but Jake ignored them all. Hold on, he called back. This is going to be rough. Una braced herself as the ship twisted and dove. Keth weapons fire streaked past the windows. Jake flew like a man possessed, weaving through the debris field of the Eternal Crown using the wreckage as cover. A Keth fighter got too close. Jake spun the ship and fired back with weapons that should not have been on a cargo freighter. The fighter exploded in a ball of flame. Una watched in amazement. You are no ordinary pilot. Jake did not respond. He was already calculating the jump to hyperspace. The ship groaned under the strain but held together. When they finally jumped to safety, the stars stretched into lines and then into nothing. The second chance sailed through the void between worlds carrying a princess and a cargo pilot toward an uncertain future. Jake returned to check on her wounds. He changed her bandages and gave her medicine for the pain. His hands were gentle despite their roughness. You saved my life, Una said. I am Princess Una of the Valoran Empire. My mother is Queen Hana. I can give you anything. Ships, wealth, land, a title, citizenship in the Empire with full rights. Jake listened to her offer without expression. Then he shook his head. I do not want those things. Then what do you want? She asked again. Frustration crept into her voice. No one does something for nothing. Jake stood and looked down at her. His eyes held something she could not name. Sadness, maybe. Or pity. I want you to be better than the people who raised you, he said quietly. Your empire treats humans like animals. You could change that. That would be worth more than any reward. He walked back to the cockpit, leaving Una alone with her thoughts. She stared at the ceiling of the shabby little ship and felt something crack inside her chest. She had been taught that humans were weak and simple. She had believed it without question. But this human had risked his life for an enemy who had given him every reason to hate her. He had asked for nothing in return except that she be better. For the first time in her life, Princess Una of the Valoran Empire felt truly small. And for the first time she began to wonder if everything she believed might be wrong. The second chance carried them through the darkness between stars. Behind them, the wreckage of the Eternal Crown drifted cold and silent. Ahead lay a future that neither of them could predict, but something had changed in those burning corridors. Something had shifted in the heart of a princess who had never been taught to see humans as equals. Jake Mitchell did not know it yet, but he had started a fire that would one day burn across the galaxy. The neutral station hung in the space between empires, where no flag flew and no law ruled except money. Jake brought the second chance into dock with practiced ease. The journey had taken 3 days, and in that time, Una had learned more about humans than in her entire life before. Jake did not talk much about himself. He answered her questions in short sentences and changed the subject when she pressed too hard. But she learned things by watching him. The way he shared his food even though he did not have much. The way he checked on her wounds every few hours without being asked. The way he slept in the pilot's seat so she could have the only bed. These were not the actions of a lesser being. These were the actions of someone who cared about others more than himself. On the morning of the third day, Jake told her that Valoran forces were coming to the station. Her people had received word of the attack and sent ships to find her. She would be home soon, Yuna felt something strange in her chest. Relief, yes, but also something else. Something like lost dot before they take you back. Jake said, "We should talk about what you will tell them." Yuna frowned. "I will tell them the truth. A human saved my life." Jake shook his head. "That might not be safe for you. Your people do not like humans. If they know you owe your life to one of us, it could be used against you." Yuna stared at him. He was trying to protect their reputation, even though it meant he would receive no credit for what he had done. Even though it meant his sacrifice would be forgotten. "Why do you care what happens to me?" she asked. Jake shrugged. "I do not know. Maybe because you actually listened when I talked. Most Valorans would not even look at a human. You ask questions. You try to understand. That is not much. It is more than you think." The Valoran ships arrived within the hour. Soldiers in gleaming armor flooded the station searching for their princess. When they found her in the cargo bay of a human freighter, their faces twisted with confusion and suspicion. Admiral Tay led the rescue party. He was an old warrior with scars on his face and ice in his eyes. He looked at Jake like he was looking at an insect. "What is this?" he demanded. "What is a human doing with the princess?" Yuna stepped forward before Jake could speak. "This man saved my life. When the Eternal Crown was attacked, he pulled me from the wreckage and brought me here. Without him, I would be dead or worse." Admiral Tay studied Jake with cold calculation. "And what does he want in return?" "Nothing," Yuna said. She looked at Jake, and something passed between them. He asked for nothing. The Admiral did not believe it. No one did. They surrounded Jake and demanded answers. They searched his ship and found nothing but old cargo containers and worn-out equipment. They ran his name through their databases and found a file marked "former prisoner." "This man was in our prison," System Admiral Tay said. "He is a criminal. I was arrested for smuggling food to a human refugee camp," Jake said calmly. "Your empire let those people starve." "I did not." Yuna felt the shame again. It was becoming familiar now. A weight in her chest that grew heavier with every new thing she learned. She stepped between Jake and the soldiers. "This man is under my protection. He saved my life, and I will not allow him to be harmed." Admiral Tay looked shocked. "Princess," he said carefully, "this is not appropriate. He is human." "I know what he is," Yuna said, and her voice was hard as steel. "He's the man who carried me through fire while my own guards lay dead. He's the man who treated my wounds with his own supplies. He's the man who asked for nothing when he could have asked for everything. I know exactly what he is." The soldiers backed away. They did not understand, but they obeyed. Yuna was still a princess, and her word was law. She turned to Jake one last time. "Let me reward you, please. I cannot bear to owe you so much." Jake smiled, and it was a sad smile. The smile of someone who had seen too much and expected too little. "You do not owe me anything," he said. "But if you want to pay me back, then remember what I said. Be better. Change things. That is the only reward I want." He walked back to his ship without looking back. The second chance lifted off and sailed out of the station. Within minutes, it vanished into hyperspace, and Jake Mitchell was gone. Yuna stood at the window and watched until the stars were empty. Then she turned and faced her future. 3 years passed. Yuna returned to the Empire and took her place at her mother court. She sat in council meetings and attended diplomatic functions. She smiled when she was supposed to smile and spoke when she was supposed to speak, but inside she was changing. She used her influence in small ways at first. A word here, a suggestion there. She pushed for better treatment of human workers in the mining colonies. She argued against the harshest punishments for human criminals. She quietly blocked laws that would have made things worse. Her mother noticed nothing. Queen Hannah was busy with matters of state and war. The Keth Dominion grew bolder every year, and the Empire had to respond. There was no time to worry about humans, but Una worried. She thought about Jake Mitchell every day. She wondered where he was and what he was doing. She sent agents to find him, but he was a ghost. A rumor. A story told in bars and refugee camps across the galaxy. They said he appeared whenever there was trouble. Whenever people needed help and no one else would come. He flew his battered ship into war zones and disaster sites. He carried medicine to plague worlds and food to starving colonies. He never stayed long. He never asked for payment. He just helped and then he was gone. The humans called him a hero. The empires called him a fool. Una called him the debt she could never repay. She kept a small picture of his ship hidden in her room. Sometimes late at night, she would look at it and remember the man who had carried her through fire. The man who had asked her to be better. She was trying. Every day she was trying. But the empire was vast and old and set in its ways. Change came slowly when it came at all. Then the war began and everything changed. The Keth struck the border worlds without warning. Whole planets fell in days. The Valoran fleet scrambled to respond, but the enemy had new weapons. Terrible weapons that cut through shields like they were paper. Intelligence reports said the weapons came from human engineers. Engineers the Keth had enslaved and forced to work. The very people the empires had ignored and mistreated had been turned into a weapon against them. Queen Hana raged at the betrayal. She blamed the humans for their weakness. She refused to see that her own cruelty had created this threat. Una saw it clearly. She remembered what Jake had said about being better. She understood now why it mattered, but understanding was not enough. The war was here and the empire was burning. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, Jake Mitchell was still flying his ship toward the people who needed him most. The Battle of Sorngate would be remembered as the darkest day in Valoran history. 300 warships faced the Keth Armada in the shadow of a dying star. By the end of the day, only 40 would survive. Queen Hannah watched from the bridge of her flagship, the Divine Throne, as her fleet was torn apart. The Keth weapons were unlike anything they had faced before. Energy beams that passed through shields like they did not exist. Missiles that predicted every evasive maneuver. Technology that should have been impossible. Admiral Tay stood beside her with blood on his face and despair in his eyes. "We cannot hold them," he said. "We must retreat." The Queen gripped her throne with white knuckles. "I will not run from these animals. Send in the reserve fleet." There is no reserve fleet. They are all dead or dying. Around them the bridge crew worked frantically. Alarms screamed from every console. The ship shuddered as another blast struck the hull. Through the windows the stars were filled with fire and wreckage. Una stood at the back of the bridge, watching her mother face the impossible. She had argued against this battle. She had begged her mother to seek allies. The human coalition had offered help, but the Queen refused. Humans were beneath them. They would win alone or die alone. Now they were dying. A young officer looked up from his console with terror in his eyes. "Enemy boarding parties have breached the lower decks. They are coming for the command section." Queen Hannah stood slowly. Her face was calm, even as her world burned around her. She drew a ceremonial blade from her belt. "A queen of the Valoran Empire does not surrender," she said. "We will fight to the last." Admiral Tay drew his own weapon. The bridge crew armed themselves with whatever they could find. They were not soldiers. They were navigators and engineers. But they would die with their queen if that was what fate demanded. Una closed her eyes and thought of Jake. She wondered if he knew what was happening here. She wondered if he would even care. After everything her people had done to his, why would he help them again? The doors to the bridge began to glow red. The Keth were cutting through. The sound of plasma torches filled the air along with the distant screams of dying crew members. Then something strange happened. The ship lurched violently to one side. Through the windows, Una saw a small vessel streak past. It was old and battered and covered in scars. It flew straight into the Keth formation with weapons blazing. The second chance. Una's heart stopped. It could not be. It was impossible. But there it was. Jake's ship dancing through the enemy fleet like a leaf in a storm. He was not alone. Other ships followed him. Dozens of them. Human freighters and cargo vessels, and old military craft that should have been in junkyards. They formed a ragged line behind the second chance and threw themselves at the KETH. Where did they come from? Admiral Tay whispered. Una knew. Jake had spent 3 years helping people, saving lives, building connections across the galaxy. These were the people he had helped. They had come to repay their debts. The Keth boarding party broke through the doors. Soldiers in dark armor poured onto the bridge with weapons raised. The Queen stood defiant with her blade ready to die fighting. Then the lights went out. In the darkness there was movement. Fast and brutal. The sound of bodies hitting the floor. The crack of bones and the wet thud of flesh against metal. When the emergency lights flickered on the Keth soldiers were down. All of them. Standing in the middle of the carnage was a single figure in a battered flight suit. Jake Mitchell. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds. His face was bruised and one eye was swollen shut. But he stood steady with a pistol in one hand and a knife in the other. The bridge crew stared at him in shock. Admiral Tay raised his weapon on instinct, but Una grabbed his arm. No, she said. He is with us. Jake looked around the bridge, taking in the destruction. His eyes passed over the Queen without recognition. Then they found Una, and he almost smiled. You look better than last time, he said. Una laughed despite everything. The sound was strange in the burning room. You look worse. Jake holstered his weapons. We need to move. My people are holding the Keth back, but they cannot do it forever. Your ships need to retreat now while there is still a chance. Queen Hannah stepped forward. Her eyes were hard and suspicious. Who are you? Why would humans help us? Jake looked at her, and there was no fear in his gaze. No respect either. Just weariness. Because someone has to. And because your daughter asked me once to help her people be better. I am still waiting for that to happen. The Queen turned to Una with shock on her face. You know this human? He saved my life, Una said quietly. 3 years ago, when the Eternal Crown was destroyed. He pulled me from the wreckage and asked for nothing in return. I have been trying to find a way to repay him ever since. Queen Hannah looked between her daughter and the bleeding human. For the first time in her life, she did not know what to say. The ship shook again. More explosions in the distance. Jake moved to the communications console and began typing commands. I am sending coordinates to your fleet, he said. There is a nebula nearby where the Keth sensors cannot reach. Take your ships there and regroup. My people will cover your retreat. Admiral Tay looked at the coordinates. This will work, he said with surprise. But your ships? They will be slaughtered. Jake did not look up from the console. We know. The next hour was chaos. The Valoran fleet limped toward the nebula while human ships threw themselves at the Keth. It was not a battle. It was a sacrifice. Small ships against massive warships. Old weapons against advanced technology. Courage against impossible odds. Jake stayed on the divine throne coordinating the retreat. He directed traffic and managed communications and kept the fleet from falling apart. He had not slept in days. He was bleeding through his bandages. But he did not stop. Una watched him work and felt something break inside her. All those years of searching. All those dreams of finding him and thanking him properly. And here he was bleeding on her mothership because he could not stop helping people who had never helped him. When the last Valoran ship reached the nebula, Jake finally collapsed. He fell against the console and slid to the floor. His face was gray and his breathing was shallow. Yuna ran to him and caught his head before it hit the deck. "Stay with me," she said. "You did not survive all of this just to die now." Jake opened his eyes and looked at her. His voice was barely a whisper. "Did everyone make it? Yes. Because of you. Now stop talking and let us help you." He smiled and his eyes closed. His body went limp in her arms. Yuna screamed for medics. Soldiers rushed forward and lifted Jake onto a stretcher. Queen Hannah watched in silence as the human, who had saved her daughter and her fleet, was carried away. She did not understand. She could not understand, but she knew that something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted in the universe. A human had done what her own people could not. A human had shown courage and sacrifice that put her warriors to shame. And now she owed him everything. The Royal Medical Bay was the finest in the Empire. Machines that could heal almost any wound. Doctors trained for decades in the most advanced techniques. Medicine worth more than STARSHIPS. Jake Mitchell lay in the center of it all, looking small and broken on the white sheets. Tubes ran from his arms and sensors covered his chest. The machines beeped steadily, marking time as his body fought to survive. Queen Hannah stood at the foot of his bed with her hands clasped behind her back. She had not moved for hours. She just stood there staring at the human who had upended everything she believed. The doctors said he should be dead. The wounds he had taken would have killed any normal person, but his heart kept beating. His lungs kept breathing. Something inside him refused to give up, just like when he boarded her ship, just like when he held that corridor alone against a dozen Keth soldiers, just like when he coordinated the retreat while bleeding out on her bridge. She did not understand him. She had studied humans her entire life. She knew their weaknesses and their limitations. She knew they were emotional and irrational and short-lived. She knew they were inferior. But this one human had done more for her empire in one day than half her admirals had done in their careers. This one human had shown courage that put her finest warriors to shame. It made no sense. The door opened and Yuna entered. She stopped when she saw her mother standing there. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then the queen turned. Her face was unreadable. Her voice was cold. "Who is he?" she pressed. "Tell me everything." Yuna walked to Jake's bedside and looked down at his sleeping face. She remembered how those eyes had looked at her 3 years ago. Without fear, without greed, just kindness. "I told you," she said. "He saved my life." That is not an answer. Who is he really? What does he want? Why does he keep helping us when we have given him every reason to hate us? Yuna turned to face her mother. Maybe that is exactly why Queen Hannah frowned. "Explain." Yuna sat down in the chair beside Jake's bed. She was tired. So tired. But this conversation had been coming for 3 years. She could not avoid it any longer. "When I was trapped on the Eternal Crown," she began, "I thought I was going to die. The Keth were coming and my guards were dead. Then this human appeared out of nowhere. He did not know who I was. He did not care. He just saw someone who needed help, and he helped." The queen said nothing. She just listened. "I offered him everything. Money, land, ships, a title. He refused it all. He said he only wanted one thing. What? He wanted me to be better than the people who raised me. Queen Hannah's face tightened. "That is an insult." "No." Yuna stood and faced her mother directly. "It is the truth. We have treated humans like animals for 100 years. We conquered their worlds. We enslaved their people. We told ourselves they were inferior because it made us feel superior. But look at him. Look at what he has done. Does that seem inferior to you?" The queen looked at Jake. His chest rose and fell slowly. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. "He is one human," she said. "An exception. He is not an exception." Yuna's voice was rising now. "All those ships that saved our fleet, all those pilots who died covering our retreat, they were human. They came because of him. Because he spent 3 years helping people without asking for anything in return. That is what humans are capable of when we stop crushing them under our boots. Queen Hannah was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quieter. I do not understand him. In my world, everyone wants something. Power, wealth, influence. The idea of helping others for nothing is foreign to me. No. Una sat back down. She took Jake's hand in hers. It was warm and rough with calluses. That is why we need to change. Not because he asked us to. Because we have been wrong about everything. The Queen turned away. She walked to the window and looked out at the stars. The nebula swirled outside, hiding the remnants of her broken fleet. The Council will never accept this, she said. Our people have believed humans are lesser for generations. You cannot change that with one act of heroism. Then we will change it with many acts. We will change it slowly. We will change it because it is right. Una joined her mother at the window. I have been working on this for 3 years. Small changes, little improvements. It is not enough, but it is a start. Queen Hannah looked at her daughter with new eyes. You have been doing this in secret. Yes. Why did you not tell me? Because you would have. Stop me. The Queen had no answer for that. It was true, and they both knew it. Behind them, Jake stirred. His eyes opened slowly, and he looked around the room with confusion. When he saw the 2 women at the window, he tried to sit up. Pain shot across his face, and he fell back against the pillows. Una rushed to his side. Do not move. You are badly hurt. Jake looked at her, and recognition dawned in his eyes. Una. You are safe. Thanks to you. Again. He looked past her to the Queen. His expression did not change. Your mother, he said. I remember her from the bridge. Queen Hannah walked toward the bed. Her steps were slow and measured. She looked down at Jake, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that had no answer. You are the human my daughter speaks of, she said. The one who saved her 3 years ago. I am just a cargo pilot. You are more than that. She paused. I do not understand you. I have been standing here for hours, trying to understand, and I cannot. Jake met her gaze without flinching. There is nothing to understand. I saw people who needed help. I helped. That is all. That is not all. No one does something for nothing. What do you want? Name it, and I will give it to you. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was soft but steady. I want you to stop treating my people like slaves. I want you to give them the same rights as Valorans. I want you to see them as equals. That is what I want. Queen Hannah stared at him. That is impossible. Then I do not want anything. The silence stretched between them. Una watched her mother face change. Something was happening behind those cold eyes. Something was cracking. Finally, the Queen spoke. You are a fool, she said. But you are the bravest fool I have ever met. She turned and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped and looked back. The war is not over. The Keth are still out there. If we survive this, I will think about what you have asked. That is all I can promise. She left without waiting for a response. Jake closed his eyes. His face was pale and exhausted. That went better than expected, he said. Why, Una laughed. She could not help it. You just demanded that the most powerful woman in the galaxy free her entire slave population. And you think that went well? She did not have me executed. That is progress. Una took his hand again. Get some rest. We have a war to win, and I need you alive to do it. Jake smiled. His eyes were already closing. I am not going anywhere. Not this time. And for the first time since they had met, Una believed him. The alliance was announced on a cold morning in the capital city. Queen Hannah stood on the steps of the Crystal Palace with the leaders of the human coalition beside her. Cameras broadcast her words across 1,000 worlds. We have been at war with ourselves for too long, she said. We have treated our neighbors as enemies when they should have been friends. Today that ends. Today we stand together against the true enemy. Today we become one. Across the empire people watched in shock. Valorans who had grown up believing humans were lesser beings saw their queen treating human leaders as equals. It was unthinkable. It was revolutionary. It was necessary. The Keth had not stopped their advance. World after world fell to their forces. The new weapons they possessed made conventional defense impossible. Only by combining their strength did the Valoran Empire and human coalition have any hope of survival. Jake watched the announcement from a hospital bed. He was healing slowly, but the doctor said he would recover fully. Una sat beside him as she had every day since the battle. "Your mother is a good speaker," Jake said. "She has been practicing that speech for weeks." Una smiled. "I helped her write it." Jake looked at her. "You did?" "She asked me to. She said I understood humans better than anyone on her staff." "I did not have the heart to tell her that I learned everything I know from a cargo pilot." Jake laughed. It hurt his ribs, but he laughed anyway. "I am glad I could be useful." The next months were a blur of preparation. Ships were built. Soldiers were trained. Strategies were planned. For the first time in history, Valoran and human forces trained side by side. Jake was offered command of a warship. He refused. He was offered a position on the War Council. He refused that too. Instead, he volunteered to coordinate refugee evacuations and supply lines and medical transports. The admirals were confused. This was the man who had saved a queen fleet. He could have had anything he wanted. Why would he choose such unglamorous work? Una understood. She found him one evening loading supplies onto a transport ship. His uniform was dirty and his face was tired, but his eyes were alive. "You are not a warrior," she said. "You are a helper." Jake shrugged. "Warriors win battles. Helpers win wars. Someone has to make sure the soldiers have food and medicine. Someone has to make sure the refugees have somewhere to go. That is what I am good at." Una watched him work. His movements were quick and efficient. Every box he loaded would save lives somewhere. Every trip his ship made would bring hope to people who had none. "I used to think courage meant fighting," she said, "holding a weapon and facing the enemy. But you have shown me something different." Jake looked at her. "What is that?" "The courage to care. The courage to help when no one is watching. The courage to do small things that matter, even when no one will remember them." He smiled. "That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." The final battle came 3 months later. The combined fleet faced the Keth Armada above their homeworld. It was the largest space battle in recorded history. Thousands of ships filled the void. The fate of multiple civilizations hung in the balance. Jake was not on the front lines. He was coordinating evacuations from a medical frigate behind the main fleet. But he watched through sensors as the battle unfolded. Valoran and human ships fought as one. Tactics developed in joint training sessions proved effective against Keth formations. New weapons designed by human and Valoran engineers together cut through enemy defenses. It was not easy. Ships were destroyed on both sides. Lives were lost that could never be replaced. Commander Liam Park led the human forces with skill and courage that matched any Valoran admiral. He had served with Jake years ago, before either of them became legends. When the Keth flagship targeted Queen Anna vessel, it was human pilots who intercepted the killing blow. 3 small fighters threw themselves into the path of the beam. They were vaporized instantly, but they saved the Queen life. Jake watched the sacrifice from his frigate. He did not know those pilots personally, but he knew what they represented. They were humans who had been taught their whole lives that they were lesser beings. And they had just died to save an empire that had enslaved their ancestors. That was the moment he knew things had truly changed. The Keth surrendered at sunset. Their fleet was shattered and their homeworld was surrounded. The leaders who had started this war were captured and brought to justice. The celebration lasted for days. Across both the Valoran Empire and Human Coalition, people danced in the streets. Enemies who had fought together became friends. Old hatreds began to fade. Queen Hannah summoned Jake to her throne room 1 week after the victory. The Crystal Hall was filled with dignitaries and nobles and military leaders. Every eye watched as the human cargo pilot walked down the long aisle toward the Queen. Una stood at her mother's side. Her face was calm, but her eyes were bright with emotion. She had waited 3 years for this moment. Jake Mitchell, the Queen said, "You have done more for this empire than words can express. You saved my daughter. You saved my fleet. You showed us what we could become if we let go of our pride." Jake stood before the throne looking uncomfortable in formal clothes. He was never good with ceremonies. He preferred the quiet work of helping people one at a time. The Queen descended from her throne. The crowd gasped as she walked toward him. When she reached the bottom of the steps, she did something that had never been done in the 1,000-year history of the Valoran Empire. She knelt before a human. The silence was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. "I cannot repay what I owe," the Queen said, "but I can change what we are." She rose and addressed the assembly. "From this day forward, all humans in Valoran space are granted full citizenship and equal rights. The old laws are abolished. The old hatreds are ended. We will build a new future together." The room erupted in sound. Cheers and gasps and confused murmurs filled the air. History was being made, and everyone knew it. Jake stood in the center of the chaos, looking lost. Una pushed through the crowd and reached his side. "You did it," she said. "You changed everything." He shook his head. "I just flew my ship. You did the rest." She took his hand. The gesture silenced the people around them. A princess holding the hand of a human in public. Another tradition shattered. "Then stay," she said. "Help us build something better." Jake looked at her. He thought of all the years he had spent running from place to place, helping and then leaving, never staying long enough to see the results. Maybe it was time to stop running. "Okay," he said. "I will stay." The celebration continued around them. Nobles and soldiers and common people, all caught up in the joy of victory and the promise of change. But in the center of the crowd, a princess and a cargo pilot stood holding hands. They had started something together 3 years ago in the wreckage of a burning ship. Now they would see it through together. The galaxy was changing. Old empires were learning new ways. Former slaves were becoming citizens. Enemies were becoming allies. And it had all started because one human had seen someone who needed help and had chosen to care. That was the power of humanity. Not weapons or technology or military strength. Just the simple courage to help when no one else would. Jake Mitchell never thought of himself as a hero. He was just a cargo pilot who could not walk away from people in trouble. But the universe remembered him differently. They remembered him as the human who taught an empire how to be better. They remembered him as the debt that changed history. They remembered him as the proof that one person could make a difference. And somewhere in the stars, his old ship, the Second Chance, still flew. Battered and scarred, but still flying. Still carrying hope to people who needed it. Some things never change. Some things should not.